Hour number 3 of the Green Mountain Mornings program underway at 16 minutes past the 8 o'clock hour on Tuesday, April 11th. Your host, Chris Lenois, with you. Joining me in the studio for the remainder of today's program, however, is Chris Mays of the Brattleboro Reformer, alternating every other week with Mike Fair to talk about stories that they've been covering in the past week here in our local community. Good to see you, Chris.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Feels like it's been a while. I've been saying that a lot to a lot of people. There's been different things going on here, and maybe it's just been we've been so busy with so many different news items, especially around town meeting and everything. But you were here 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It just feels like it's been longer than that, but good to have you back here. Maybe it is because of all these changes that we've seen in local governance as the page turns from town meeting day to post-town meeting day with the business of town. And last Tuesday was the first meeting for Bratt Selectboard in the new era of having Kate O'Connor as the chair, Tim Wessel and Brandy Starr as members of the board in place of David Gartenstein and Dick DeGray. And you were there. You have a story about some of the business that they covered in Friday's Brattleboro Reformer. But just first of all, your impressions of the new makeup of the board, the new dynamic of the board as you were sitting there last Tuesday. What did you think about it?
I really didn't have too many thoughts. It was interesting. I thought they were gonna, this one agenda item on the rules they use for governing. I thought that would just be something they would go through quickly, but it ended up being this big long conversation, and they didn't take any action.
Yeah, but it didn't really strike you. I mean, it didn't seem to me either that there was much change from Kate O'Connor to David Gartenstein as far as how the meeting runs. And it's hard to tell after one meeting, but it seemed kind of similar to me.
Yeah.
And I guess there was a giddiness to the whole affair last Tuesday. If you go back, if people watch it on BCTV, there was a whole lot of laughter. And not to say that there wasn't some jocularity beforehand, especially with John Allen kind of sitting in the corner and playing his Statler and Waldorf role that he usually plays. Do you get that reference? Is that too young for you?
Yeah.
That's a Muppets reference. Okay. I was going to say, I just used a reference that probably went right over Chris's head. But anyway, the kind of, other voice in the room that's kind of making the jokes on the aside. But it just felt like everything was a little bit more giddy than your average select board meeting. But I think that stands to reason.
Yeah, there were a couple jokes about them being the new guys on the block.
Yeah, which made it fun. Certainly for them, and it seemed like everybody was ready to get along, which brings us to this issue that you wrote about with regards to rules and how the business is conducted at the meetings. Give some details on what exactly was being discussed there.
Well, it sounded like one of the new select board members, Tim Wessel, wanted to make one of the rules that's kind of been a loose rule, a more formal rule,
right?
Where the chairman or chairwoman doesn't make any motions, and to maybe think about adding seconds, making it necessary to have a vote seconded in order to have a vote.
And for any motion, would have to be seconded. And it is that we should emphasize this isn't a change in the rules. What Tim was asking about, he's asking for an enforcement of the rules, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, basically,
right,
and make it formal.
Because we've heard anybody who watches a select board meeting. For example, when David Gartenstein would talk about the first item on the agenda is always approving the minutes. And he says, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. He won't move it, but he's asking somebody to. And then somebody says, so moved. And I think they do second that as far as approving the minutes. But in the course of the meeting, if the chair of the select board wants to make a motion to amend any of the agenda items, to do anything, they currently can do it, even though they're not supposed to do it. Is that accurate?
Well, I think they try to stay away from doing that if possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Tim wasn't saying this in terms of anything other than he wanted to have the rules enforced. What was his reason for bringing this up?
Well, he was saying he worried that maybe this could give more power to the chairperson than anyone else in the room, and the select board members who have been on the board for a few years each, none of them agreed with that.
Yeah, it seemed to me that it was a split between Tim and Brandy, who felt like, maybe this is worth looking up, versus Kate and David and John. All feeling like it wasn't necessary. And you wonder how much of that is just the experience of them all feeling like they are friendly
Yeah.
versus a situation where and there have been instances, and you've been to board meetings, I'm sure, in other communities where you haven't seen quite the same friendly dynamic, and that's why you have these rules in place.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of interesting that this comes on after the reorg meeting where they were just voting on the chairperson and vice chair, and now they're starting to vote on the real issues. And now it's the first meeting, and this issue comes up. So
Right, and the vice chair is Brandy,
right,
correct? So we do have a new member on the board, along with one of the carrying over members, and Kate O'Connor setting the agenda for the meeting. It'll be interesting to see. How did they leave this? Is it something that they're going to take up at another meeting in a more formal way, or?
Yeah, they said let's chew on this a little bit, and we'll bring it back.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess they all have to chew on it separately because they can't get together and talk about this without it being a public meeting. So we'll have to see how that all goes. But it is definitely a good start for the Brattleboro Select Board in terms of just talking about and feeling out the new members. Now, they also had some business to conduct there with regards to some of the ballot items that Brattleboro residents voted on with the plastic bag ban and compassionate cities. Starting with the plastic bag ban, what did they decide to do that night?
I think they said this is where they're furthest along in terms of those items. Town staff and administration they've been working on what they're going to propose to the select board, and they're also working with the town attorney to see what would make sense. Right now, it's a little difficult because no other community in Vermont has a plastic bag ban, so they have to work within Vermont statute, and so they're looking for a little guidance.
Yeah, I'll give Peter Elwell and the rest of the administration credit. They didn't wait for this vote to figure out what would happen if it passed, and certainly in a community like Brattleboro, it seemed pretty obvious that this plastic bag ban was going to pass, so they had already done their homework, had some answers for the board. I thought it was interesting what Brandy brought up about the way government is structured in Vermont versus other states, because you do have other states and other communities, I should say, in other states that are doing this. But I forget the exact term that she used. I don't know if you remember it.
I don't remember it either, but I remember what she said.
But
yeah.
where town government is essentially an extension of state government. It's actually part of state government. I found that very fascinating, and how that could play a role in how this gets implemented, how it gets enforced. But we'll let them figure that out. What about compassionate cities? What are they going to do there?
Well, that was something they were a little bit unsure of. The administration, they understand that it will take signing onto this charter for compassion,
which is an international movement,
right?
Right.
Yeah, and they're not sure how much of this will affect the municipality. I think they're expecting that they're going to work with a community organization or group of organizations in coordinating different activities and stuff around being a compassionate city.
Right. So no actions taken on either of those items, but they expect to take action on them both pretty soon, right? If not this next meeting, then maybe in May.
Yeah, and I've always wondered if the plastic bag ban was something that might go to the planning commission too.
Good point. Yeah, there's still a lot to unpack there, and especially how it might impact us here in the Brattleboro community and people who visit us from outside the Brattleboro community. We are a hub after all. We're talking with Chris Mays of the Brattleboro Reformer, and we'll continue that conversation after the bottom of the hour news break here on Green Mountain Mornings. Up to 47 degrees now at 21 minutes before the 9 o'clock hour. Green Mountain Mornings continuing now. Your host, Chris Lenois. I'm happy that it's 47 degrees and sunny. My guest, Chris Mays of the Brattleboro Reformer, maybe not as happy that it's 47 degrees and sunny because he's a snowboarder. You're still making runs out there in Mount Snow, though, right?
Oh yeah. Yesterday it was great. It was getting a little slow and soft by the time I left around 11, but.
And you were telling me off the air that you think that we'll have some skiing up through the end of the month. Oh no, through the end of the week.
Yeah, they're planning to go to Easter.
Right on. Hey, we have a caller on the air right here at the beginning of it. Let's see if it's a legitimate caller. KVT, you're on the air.
Well, I hope so.
Okay. I've been getting these kind of like weird robocalls on the studio line, Gene. So there we go. It's an actual human being.
Last time I checked my pulse, yes.
Go ahead. What do you got?
Regarding the plastic bag issue, I wonder, I haven't been following it that closely, but has there been any input from the businesses that will be affected by this? I know there probably was a town meeting, but in this particular select board meeting, I wonder if there was any discussion of what the businesses' reactions might have been, favorable, neutral, unfavorable, and also in the context of any legal action that they might consider to delay or defeat the measure. Is that, do you guys know anything about that?
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I haven't heard anything in public meetings. There was nothing at town meeting or at this select board meeting. I think businesses are probably waiting to see what this looks like, and I think the town is going to be sympathetic to that.
I think the town also, I mean, this was just the beginning of the process in terms of how they enact it. And I think, I got to think, and this is just me speculating because I didn't hear the words public hearing come up at that select board meeting, but that's got to be part of the process because you're absolutely right, Gene. During the representative town meeting, there was really nothing except people getting up and saying, this is a great idea. We need to ban plastic bags without anybody really considering the impact on commercial businesses or on low-income people. So
right, and I have to think, and again, I haven't really studied the issue, but just speculating myself over here this morning, I was thinking of a couple of possible outcomes. Number one, the businesses might be just against it because it's not business as usual, and any change is regarded as with suspicion sometimes.
Yep.
Two, it might save them money in the short run because plastic bags cost money. C, it might cost them money in the long run because they'd have to increase their purchase of paper bags. And D, they might not like the idea of the public relations issue it might be, because you know as well as I do, not everybody's going to get the message if and when it is implemented, and people are going to be showing up at the store without without their own bags, and they're going to be confronted by the issue at checkout, and it might be an issue. I mean, paper bags might alleviate that issue, but it's going to be disruptive at best, I would say.
Well, and I had Tim Maciel on the program back when this was first put on the ballot item, and we talked about some of these possibilities and things, but it goes beyond the grocery stores. Obviously, the grocery store is the biggest user of plastic bags, but what about Sam's? And your point about cost, I think, is really appropriate. They probably have how many thousands of plastic bags already printed with the Sam's logo on it and all the money they've invested in marketing and branding the plastic bags that they have. What do they do with those? And are they going to want to get rid of those? Will there be a time limit on this? I think there's a whole lot of details that got to work out, and I do hope they do a public hearing.
Not to mention, it hadn't even occurred to me, Sam's does not offer the option of paper bags.
Right. Yeah, they have they have their bags. Peebles, I'm sure, is the same way, or Olympia. When you get into some of these national chains that are up on Putney Road. Chris, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that the town's going to be looking at is enforcement. How the town's going to enforce something, and what the ordinance is going to look like.
Yeah, the hardware stores.
Right,
yeah.
Right, so, and I'm good with it either way. I really don't care one way or the other. But I got to say, because I'm an old curmudgeon at this point, that the issue that the advocates took on your show back however many weeks ago it was, Chris, that he was so embarrassed when he talked to his friends of California, when he was shamed into,
I know.
You're in such a progressive state, and you mean you still use plastic bags? I really didn't like that position. Like, we're just so backward compared to the enlightened people of California. That just bugged me.
Well, and as well as I do, if somebody doesn't have a bag like that, you know what they're going to do? They're going to go to Walmart in Hinsdale.
That's right.
They're going to go to Price Chopper in Keene.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things to unpack here for sure. I appreciate you raising those questions this morning, Gene. Thanks so much.
Okay, have a good morning.
All right, you too. All right. Yeah, we'll have to, there's definitely a lot still. I don't think we've heard the last of this whole plastic bag issue.
No, not at all. This is just the beginning.
Yeah. Especially when, as the caller said, wait a minute, we voted for what? Wait a minute, they voted. I didn't know about this. We need to revote it again, right? Because that's what we love to do. Let's get to the revoting, because this is revote week here in our community. Tomorrow, Twin Valley, the communities that make up the Twin Valley High School communities are going to revote their budget. On Thursday, Vernon is going to revote their budget. Now, let's just give people a heads up with regards to Twin Valley. If they are in that listening area, there is an informational meeting this evening at the Twin Valley Middle High School, 7 p.m. before tomorrow's vote on this $9.3 million budget that was defeated on town meeting. Now, it was defeated basically at the behest of the towns, right?
At the Whitingham Select Board specifically.
Yeah, they said, vote this down because...
We want to send a message to the state.
About...
The state funding formula.
I love this whole the Mad Libs version of our program. But it has to do with state funding and how they don't feel that's fair. Only 8 towns in the state of Vermont rejected their budget. So clearly, even though people have a problem with it, they didn't feel this was the same way to send a message that Whitingham did. So what are they doing now? What is different about this budget that they're going to ask people to vote on tonight or tomorrow evening?
Well, they shaved $68,000 off the budget. They said we could do without some supplies and equipment upgrades and some maintenance items. We can hold off on another year. The school board met with principals of the schools and they decided that this would be appropriate. Otherwise, they feel like they're going to be cutting programming and staff, so they really don't want to do that at this point.
So, in other words, they're cutting $68,000 out of a budget that I think is, $9 million. This isn't going to affect the affordability at all. The property tax rates that they were concerned about skyrocketing are going to skyrocket.
Right, yeah. They're above the state's threshold for excessive spending, it's called. It has to do with equalized pupils, and they come up with this rate that's called the threshold, and if they're above it, they're taxed higher.
Right. 34 less students in the school than they would need in order to basically have it be a wash as far as this property tax assessment. And without these 34 students, which is a lot, in a community like the Twin Valley communities that make up that school, they'd have to cut $750,000, and that would require, as you said, cuts of personnel. The question becomes, after it's been rejected once and it's the same amount of money, will voters get the message that last time was just a protest vote? This time we really want you to approve it, or will they reject it again? And then there's going to be big trouble in Twin Valley.
Yeah.
So
they're really hopeful it gets passed this time, I think.
We'll see what happens. I think once people see that number, if they've already voted it down once, they may vote it down again. Similarly in Vernon, and you were just at the informational meeting last night where they were trying to explain this equalized pupil issue before Thursday's revote, they haven't really cut a lot out of their budget.
No, it's essentially the same. That's what they kept saying last night, and it is. The budget, I think it's 6% low, about 6% lower than last year's budget. But the way that the state requires school districts when they're warning a vote on the budget to include this per pupil equalized per pupil costs, how that spending is going to increase, and in Vernon it's 14%.
Right. Now, that they have a little bit easier case to make than Twin Valley, because ultimately what they're saying is property taxes are staying pretty stable, unlike in the Twin Valley communities, right?
Yeah, and that they're saying the population is stable and our budget is reduced. It's just this figure, it's a public relations issue.
It's the way you have to word the issue on the ballot that they feel really scared people, because and similarly in Brattleboro had this same kind of language in their warning, but because they could discuss it before the up and down vote at the representative town meeting, Mike Hebert actually felt that was effective. He said, we don't have the same chance in a Australian ballot the way it was taken up before. So we'll see if people got the message. Was it well attended last night, the informational meeting?
I can't remember. I have it in my notes.
Yeah.
I think it was under 10 people or
under
just
10?
About, yeah.
Okay, so really not well attended when you're talking about that. But I know they did a mailer. I know they're trying to get word out. They came on my show to talk about it, so we'll see. The other revote, and this one's coming up a little bit later on May 1st, but having to do with Act 46 in the towns of Wardsboro and Dover. Now, Wardsboro defeating it 79-62 on town meeting day, this proposed merger with Dover and Marlboro. Marlboro rejecting it by an even bigger amount. This proposed revote is to merge Dover and Wardsboro and keep Marlboro out?
Right.
Okay. Now, why do the people in Wardsboro, and you spoke with Bill Anton, the superintendent of their schools there, think that there is enough support for an Act 46 merger after. That's a pretty sizable vote when you're talking about 18 people saying no to something like this.
Well, after this article ran, there was a meeting in Wardsboro, and I understand the Wardsboro School Board met with the Agency of Education, and they came out in support of merging, whereas before I think they were kind of letting the residents decide what they thought. But now there's a group in town who are very opposed to this, and that includes former state legislator John Moran.
Yeah.
And his big issue seems to be loss of local control. He's very worried that Wardsboro is going to end up losing a lot of what they've had to Dover because they're a bigger district.
Yeah, and he did not think that it would pass on the revote. He thinks this is a dead issue already, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the quotes, you got some great quotes from John. We will lose our soul if the town has to cut down the school. And I know he feels that way when he was running for office again during this last election cycle against Laura Sibilia. He was very adamant about this Act 46 being the bad thing for communities like Wardsboro. Great stuff there. We'll have to wait and see that vote, not until, the beginning of next month. May 1st is the vote there. Chris Mays of the Brattleboro Reformer, you've got some stories coming up this week that you wanted to talk about as well. Give people a heads up.
Yeah, I visited a class in Marlboro College called Speech Matters. They're exploring the criminal justice system and how reforms can be made. And I attended the DRB hearing, Development Review Board hearing last week, and there was an interesting hearing, two hearings for one property. Two people are interested in buying the property. One was denied, and one is still on the table. That the farm is still on the table, and but the naturopathic medicine practice was denied.
And this is an Orchard Street property
In Brattleboro,
which is usually a residence, not a commercial property. And so, and you were saying that's the first time you've ever heard of something getting denied. At
from
DRB.
what I've covered, yeah.
Yeah. And there is a story in this morning's Reformer from that DRB update on the Commonwealth Project. Always good to talk to you about these things on a Tuesday morning. Chris, thanks for your time.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
And people can see Chris's writing in the print edition of the Reformer as well as online at reformer.com. We'll be back to wrap up this edition of the Green Mountain Mornings program right after these messages.